Thank you for this opportunity to speak to the younger Augustinians of the Asia-Pacific region. Coming from Europe, where younger friars are very few, it is a delight to be with you all today. My apologies for not being with you for a live transmission, but I'm in Poland presiding at a provincial chapter while this conference takes place. And when I agreed to give the talk, I miscalculated the time difference between the Far East and Europe, so my apologies. I was a missionary in South Korea from 1985 to 1993, as one of the first 4 friars to establish our presence there from the Australian and English-Scottish provinces. For me, it was a great adventure, and one that I will never forget. We had to learn a difficult language, become accustomed to unfamiliar food like kimchi, and we even slept on the floor, which in fact is very comfortable when you get used to it. Also, we were given new names made up of 3 Chinese characters, though I was known simply as Father Ham. It was a challenging experience, but I have to confess I fell in love with the Far East. The title of this talk is The Augustinian Approach to Social Justice. I gave this some thought, and I found it difficult to know where to begin. Firstly, it was not obvious to me that there is such a thing. It seems to me that we are informed principally by the Church's approach to social justice, based on the rich deposit of Catholic social teaching that received a large boost at the Second Vatican Council. After Vatican II, the Church became much more engaged in social justice issues, though the Church's social teaching dates back to Pope Leo XIII's groundbreaking encyclical Rerum Novarum, published in 1891, on the rights and duties of capital and labour in a newly industrializing world. Also, one of the principal features of the present pontificate of Pope Francis is the call to be a missionary church that goes forth to proclaim the gospel to a world marked by poverty, social inequality, migration, human trafficking, climate change, and a rampant economic system that puts profit before people. Because of his critique of the current economy of exclusion, as the Pope calls it, many from beyond the Church have praised his courageous voice. Pankaj Mishra, a social commentator from India and well known in the West, called him, I quote, the most convincing and influential public intellectual today. And he also called Laudato Si the most important piece of intellectual criticism in our time. Pope Francis, therefore, is being recognized by many as someone who speaks out on the issues of the day. But one must remember that he always does so from a gospel perspective, not a purely political one. He refers to the social dimension of evangelization in Evangelii Gaudium, and this is the context of any Augustinian approach to social justice. We approach these issues, therefore, from within the Church, and not in any exclusively Augustinian sense. To be Augustinian means to be rooted in the life of the Church, a reminder of the fact that we are the only religious order founded by the Holy See. To turn now to the title of the talk, An Augustinian Approach to Social Justice. It seems to me that we can draw on a number of sources. Let me name 4. Augustine himself, the Constitutions, the Ratio Institutionis, and the General Chapter of 2019. Let us take them one by one. Firstly, Augustine. He was a man of his own time, and did not face many of the social issues that we face today. So we cannot go to him for helpful quotes on climate change or the evils of capitalism. Nevertheless, he was engaged with the world around him. For instance, while he did not condemn slavery as such, which was commonplace in the Roman Empire, he worked to ensure that slaves were treated justly and sought to free them. He was also aware of the natural world and its beauty, and speaks movingly in the Confessions of, and I quote here, "the beauty of the waters gathered together in the wide expanses of the sea, and the dry land, still bare as it rises from the sea, endowed with visible organized form to bring forth plants and trees." Unquote. Book 13. He would have been horrified at what we are doing to our planet today. I am certain he would have been enthusiastically involved in care for our common home. More than that, Augustine is someone we can think with. I got this notion from Rowan Williams, British theologian, Augustine scholar, and former Archbishop of Canterbury. He says, Augustine demonstrates that Christianity is something that can be thought with. He is a thinker whose doctrinal convictions open unexpected vistas on questions that are not narrowly theological. Unquote. What does he mean by that? Augustine's thinking was not done in the abstract. It is worth remembering that he never taught theology in a university. Rather, his theology comes from issues of the day he was grappling with. For instance, the challenge from the Donatists who saw themselves as a purer church. His personal struggles with sexuality and the pull of desire. The fall of the Roman Empire and the accusation that Christians were to blame, and so on. These experiences led to Augustine's reflections on the sacraments, free will, and the two loves that govern our world, love of God and love of self. He was a living example of fides quaerens intellectum, from St. Anselm, faith seeking understanding. Or, as Augustine himself put it, credo ut intelligam, I believe in order to understand. Thinking with Augustine, therefore, we bring faith and reason together as we explore the issues that confront us. As Augustinians, we are neither unreflectingly religious nor rigidly rationalistic. We are open to what both faith and reason tell us. Our faith tells us that God has created the world out of love and endowed it with astonishing beauty and complexity, even though aspects of it are marred by the fall. Our faith also tells us that we are stewards of creation and that we must respect it. Reason, in the form of science, explains the complexity and interrelatedness of things, and how our greed and misuse of the world's resources are destroying the planet. Science gives us the tools to do something about tackling climate change, spurred on by our Christian faith in the sanctity of creation. Bringing together faith and reason in this way is therefore a very Augustinian thing to do. Augustine teaches us to look on the world with the eyes of faith and then apply our minds and reason to the problems and difficulties we see there. As Augustinians, we should be constantly reflecting on the world around us. For instance, in the documents of the 1998 Intermediate General Chapter entitled Augustinians in the Church for the World of Today, it urges us to have and I quote here, permanent attitude of reflection on reality and critical thinking in the face of historical events. A permanent attitude of reflection on reality and critical thinking in the face of historical events. If you can manage to get a copy of that document, it is worth reading and still relevant after more than 20 years. Next, our constitutions are clear. I advise you to read chapter 8 on evangelization and apostolic activity, especially the section entitled The Social Apostolate, numbers 182 to 185, and the final section is the one on the Social Apostolate in the 2008 edition. And there we read, motivated by this social commitment of ours, we are to listen attentively to the concerns of the Church and of society, and offer assistance so that the questions which the groups among whom we work present to us may be more clearly identified and more easily resolved, such as the defence of life, human rights, the situation of migrants, the dignity of women, the protection of youth, justice and peace, a more balanced economic order, the conservation of nature, etc. Unquote. Given that the list of those issues was written in 2008, it was quite prophetic. Examining our consciences, can we sincerely say we have been addressing them in our various apostolates since then? Thirdly, in the recently published Ratio Institutionis, or Plan of Formation for the Order, published in February 2020, and copies were sent to all our circumscriptions, we read there that, I quote, Augustine was aware of the social aspects of apostolic activity, and that we should take the necessary steps to acquire an adequate knowledge of the needs of this world and explore ways of manifesting solidarity with those in need. Unquote, from paragraph number 83. Let us reflect for a moment on that word solidarity, which is a fundamental principle of Catholic social teaching. And Pope Francis has made it one of the pillars of his papacy. The encyclical Fratelli Tutti is about the need for solidarity in order to rebuild our wounded world. Solidarity, the Pope says, means thinking and acting in terms of community. It means that the lives of all are prior to the appropriation of goods by a few. It also means combating the structural causes of poverty, inequality, the lack of work, land and housing, the denial of social and labour rights. It means confronting the destructive effects of the empire of money. Unquote. Strong words. What are we as an order doing about it? Especially as solidarity is also a fundamental aspect of Augustinian spirituality. Indeed, the basis of the rule of St Augustine is solidarity in the pursuit of God. We do not search for God on our own. It is a collective effort as well as an individual quest. The two most significant events in the Confessions, Augustine's vision of heaven at Ostia and his moment of conversion in the garden on hearing a child singing, "Take up and read," took place in the company of others. In the first instance with his mother Monica at Ostia, and then with his friend Alypius in the second, with whom he went on to be baptized. Social engagement, therefore, is a necessary consequence of our search for God together and the discovery of Him in others. We do this work always in the context of community, not on our own. Fourthly and finally, on our reflection on Augustinian approaches to social justice, let me point to the 2019 General Chapter. In the prior General's concluding discourse, he urged the Chapter Fathers, I quote, to be more austere so that what we have left over can be shared with the children of God, the poor, the lacking, the needy, and those despised by society that travel our cities every day. Unquote. He also praised examples of social engagement by the friars, like the new province of Our Lady of Consolation in Brazil, and their work linked to ecology, the safeguarding of creation, and the fight for justice, together with the option for the fight against class inequality. For instance, you can find out more about their impressive Augustinian Center for Integral Ecology near Belo Horizonte in Brazil on their website. And the link for that website is there in the text of this talk, which you should have with you. And one of the important resolutions of the 2019 chapter, in fact the longest, number 31, pledges the order to promote the teachings of Laudato Si on care for our common home. We are urged, I quote here, to live out our commitment to work towards sustainable solutions that promote integral human development by combating hunger and poverty, restoring dignity to the excluded, and protecting nature. And there are three parts to this. A, education and awareness in our communities so that we can reflect on how best to adapt our lifestyles to live more sustainably. B, to encourage others in our pastoral encounters to live ecologically. And C, to promote in our apostolic activities awareness, advocacy, and actions to reduce our carbon footprint and embrace a culture of encounter and solidarity with those at the margins and most vulnerable as those most impacted by environmental harm. Unquote. Also, in Resolution 32, we read that the chapter, again, let me quote, renews the Order's support and encouragement of a concrete commitment to the refugees in all the regions of the world, mentioning specific projects and cooperation with conferences of religious congregations. Unquote. So, these 4 points, Augustine himself, the Constitutions, the Ratio Institutionis, and the 2019 General Chapter, indicate ways in which we can approach this vast area of social justice as Augustinians. But, as I mentioned earlier, the context is the papacy of Pope Francis and his leadership in this whole area of engagement with the world as being fundamental to the Church's mission to proclaim the gospel ad gentes, to all the peoples. We are a church that goes forth, and therefore we should be a religious order that goes forth into the world in order to address the wide-ranging issues that face our world and which demand a gospel response. To help us deepen our understanding of the challenges facing us as a religious order, allow me to quote from New Wine in New Wineskins, subtitled The Consecrated Life and Its Ongoing Challenges Since Vatican II, published by the Congregation for Institutes of Consecrated Life and Societies of Apostolic Life in 2017. It is significant because it is a statement from the Vatican clearly outlining the change of direction taken by the Church since Vatican II. And let me quote from it. In the pre-conciliar period, religious life in all of its forms and structures represented the united and operational force for the life and mission of a militant church seen to be in constant opposition to the world. In the new season of openness and dialogue with the world, consecrated life felt pushed to the forefront of exploring the coordinates of a new church-world relationship to the benefit of the entire ecclesial body. The basis for our approach to social justice, therefore, is this new season of openness and dialogue with the world, which relates directly to the opening lines of Gaudium et Spes, the Vatican II Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, published in 1965, and which in many ways sums up the spirit not only of Vatican II, but of Pope Francis, who is calling us back to these prophetic and inspirational words. And let me give you these words now. The joys and the hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of men and women of this age, especially those who are poor or in any way afflicted, these are the joys and hopes, the griefs and anxieties of the followers of Christ. Unquote. As friars, we are being called by the Church to go forth, engage with the world, dialogue with those of goodwill, whoever they may be, Christian or not, and bring the healing love of Christ to a world desperately in need of it. Even if it is not explicitly articulated by those who feel wounded by the complexities of human life. The image that Pope Francis uses for this kind of church is that of a field hospital. And when someone is wounded in battle, you don't ask them if their cholesterol is too high. You treat the wound first. This is the opposite of a self-referential church, as Pope Francis calls it, a church overly preoccupied with internal matters of doctrine, morality, church law, and the niceties of liturgy, all of which are important and essential, but which are not the core of a merciful church, a church that is not afraid to go out on the streets, take risks, and get its hands dirty. This emphasis on a church that engages with the world fits in well with the purpose of the order as stated in our constitutions. And I quote here from paragraph 13. And let me finish with this. United harmoniously in brotherhood and spiritual friendship, we seek and worship God and work for the service of his people. In this way, we share in the Church's work of evangelization, bringing the good news to the whole world, so that we may transform the world from within. This is our witness. Unquote. An Augustinian approach to social justice, therefore, is one which is in communion with a missionary church that goes out into the world to bring Christ's healing to the wounded and the marginalised. And it is something that we do together, one in mind and heart, intent upon God. Many thanks for your attention. Let me leave you with 3 questions which you can ponder on during your breakout sessions. Number 1, what are the main problems of social justice in your country? Number 2, among those problems, which need to be tackled first? Number 3, what practical steps can be taken to address these problems? Thank you again. God bless you, and may the Holy Spirit guide you in your deliberations and in your activity.